You know, it's always risky when you mix a fight, in this case over trade, and alcohol. Seems like the decision by many provinces to ban U.S. booze has really gotten under the American skin. Here's U.S. Trade Rep Jameson Greer.
So we hear from the federal government of Canada, well, it's the provinces, and then we do have two provinces who don't have this. That being said, I think we're kind of at the end of our rope in just asking for them to do this.
A trade irritant, you say? What do you think about that, Prime Minister?
You know what's an irritant? 50% tariff on steel, 50% tariff on aluminum, 25% tariff on automobiles, all the tariffs on forest products. Those are more than irritants. Those are violations of our trade deal, okay?
I'm Catherine Cullen, and this week on The House, we've got two former political rivals who are now working together on the Prime Minister's new Canada-US Advisory Committee. Is Canada slow-walking trade talks? Does the U.S. really expect Canada to make another concession just to get this thing going? Also this week, Mark Carney issued a warning about potential Canadian weaknesses via YouTube. We'll talk about the message with 4 Canadian premiers. And The Medium, too. We'll ask people who crafted content for Justin Trudeau and Stephen Harper, what should we make of Mark Carney's foray as a YouTuber? Let's kick things off, though, with trade turbulence. The House is now in session.
There's two parties in a negotiation. One, we're not sitting here taking notes, okay, and taking instruction from the United States.
Prime Minister Mark Carney bristling when a reporter asked him whether Canada is truly negotiating with the United States right now. Though the Prime Minister also says Canada is ready to wait, even as a big free trade date on the calendar looms, July 1st. Yes, it's Canada Day, but it's also the date on paper that Canada, the U.S., and Mexico can choose to simply renew CUSMA for 16 years or trigger annual reviews for a decade. Or a third, more concerning option, a country could decide to leave the agreement altogether. The U.S. has already set a date for formal talks with Mexico, but not Canada. This week, MPs had a chance to ask Canada's new ambassador to the U.S., Mark Wiseman, what is going on when he was in Ottawa to appear before the Foreign Affairs Committee. Here's Conservative MP Adam Chambers with Ambassador Wiseman.
So your choice today here is not that you don't know the strategy, but that you won't confirm it for us. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, I'm not in a position to get into the details of Canada's strategy, as that is ministerial advice.
But you can understand how a dispassionate observer would perhaps conclude, based on stories in the media, that there is a go-slow strategy being implemented?
Mr. Chairman, as I've said very, very clearly, we are ready, willing, and able to commence the review of CUSMA.
And Janice Charette, Canada's chief trade negotiator, told a business summit this week that the July 1st deadline isn't the be-all, end-all either.
There's a lot of focus on July 1st, which is kind of a checkpoint. It's not a cliff. It's not, nothing. It's not determinative of the future of our trading relationship. The USMCA, the trading agreement, does remain in place. And I think just given the number of issues on the plate of our friends in USTR who are doing deals around the world, as well as the importance of getting this right, I don't think we should expect, and Jameson Greer has said this, that necessarily we're going to have everything resolved with a bow ready to go by July the 1st.
Now remember, this isn't just about CUSMA. There are all those sectoral tariffs on steel, aluminum, forest products, and more, and we see no sign of movement on those. This week, Mark Carney recruited some new help to advise the government on Canada-US relations. It's a bit of a team of at least sometime rivals, from unions to business to the arts and politicians of all stripes. Their first meeting is on Monday, so what are they going to advise the Prime Minister to do? And what about this idea of a so-called entry fee? That the US might ask Canada to concede something just to get these talks started. We have two of those former rivals. Erin O'Toole is the former Conservative leader. He's now president of the global business intelligence firm Addit North America. Ralph Goodale is Canada's former UK High Commissioner and a former Liberal cabinet minister. Welcome back to the House to you both.
Hello. Nice to be here.
Good to be back.
Nice to have you both on. Erin, I know you took the partisan hat off a couple of years ago, but is there any part of you that has to laugh at being on the same team on a political issue with the honorable, longtime former senior Liberal Ralph Goodale?
No. In fact, my first time serving on Team Canada was in uniform of the military. So I've always been about country first and politics second. Ralph and I did have some really good debates and battles in the House of Commons. I was his critic for a time when he was public safety minister, but I respect his lifetime of service. And this is a time where I think people are putting their political partisanship aside for the best interests of the country, because the U.S. relationship is critical for our economic prosperity and for our national security.
So, Ralph Goodale, that means we don't have to send the speaker into this meeting on Monday to referee, right? You two are going to behave yourselves?
No, I don't think the speaker will be necessary. I remember one of those exchanges in the House of Commons. Erin and I sat almost directly across the floor from each other. And one day, I forget what the issue was, he was going after me. And I noticed partway through the exchange, we were both wearing exactly the same tie. So there are some similarities.
Well, there you go. Listen, I'd like to hear from both of you. And Erin, I'll start with you. This first meeting is on Monday. What is your elevator pitch, the key thing you want to get across to the Prime Minister about what Canada should be doing right now?
I think Canada has to look at this relationship through an economic security lens. So we're not only a critical trading partner to the United States from an energy standpoint, from a manufacturing standpoint, we're also a security partner. There would be no Alaska Highway without Canada. We've worked for generations together, not just in the wars, but protecting North America, homeland security. A Canadian was on duty in Colorado Springs on 9/11, for example. So I want to make sure that we talk both of those issues. Perhaps Canadian shipbuilding, Canadian steel, Canadian aluminum can help the U.S. with some of their defense challenges. So I know they're going to be listening to all the perspectives from a really good cross-section of Canadians on this committee.
Ralph Goodale?
I think there are a number of key messages we would want to get across. One of them being, in the relationship with the United States, we are not just another trading partner. Like any other of the 190 countries around the world. Canada actually looked at this question of trade with the United States in a very detailed way. There was a royal commission on the subject. It was debated at length. There was an election held on the topic, and the side in favor of free trade with the United States in Mr. Mulroney's team won that election. And since then, there has been 35, 40 years of intensive activity to integrate our two economies so that we don't so much compete with each other or undercut each other, but work together to build stuff for the world, which we sell together internationally. And that, I think, puts us in a quite different category compared to any other trading partner the United States might have. And as Erin points out, it links very directly to issues of national security.
Challenge is that it doesn't seem, as much as Canadians have been trying, that Donald Trump is getting that message. But Erin, I want to bring you back in here. We talked about putting the partisan stripes aside, but there is a divide, a debate right now in this country about the nature of the relationship. Prime Minister Carney said recently, Canada's close ties to the United States have made some former strengths of ours into weaknesses. Pierre Poilievre is saying that essentially Mark Carney wants a rupture with the United States, right? It's sort of a question of whether to just bear through the Donald Trump era or make some pretty dramatic changes in how things go with the U.S. What do you think?
Well, I think the rupture is caused by President Trump. You know, the relationship that has been very successful for both countries for decades and decades is being changed by the U.S. In fact, the rules-based international order, what the Prime Minister talked about in his Davos speech, rupturing, is a rupture that the U.S. is causing through isolation, through tariffs, through sanctions, through quite frankly, stepping away from that leadership role that the U.S. had. And Canada supported whether the WTO and NATO, all of these multilateral efforts. But I think Pierre is bringing some good subjects up in terms of talking about our leverage on oil and gas and critical minerals. There are things that we have that the U.S. needs, and I do think we can approach this by not only securing a relationship that gives us certainty, but reasserting why we are so important to the success of North America. I think sometimes Canada's been taken for granted, and we've got to change that.
Ralph Goodale, I mean, Erin O'Toole says we have things that the U.S. wants, and I know that's a message we've consistently heard from negotiators in this country. I wonder, though, our colleagues at Radio Canada reported this week that Washington is demanding concessions, or what one source called an entry fee, before official negotiations around CUSMA begin. Given that we have stuff that the U.S. wants, should we be willing to give a little bit more up in order to get these conversations going?
Well, there's nothing about an entry fee being required mentioned anywhere in the CUSMA agreement. I note that the Prime Minister the other day said that that point had never been raised with him by President Trump. And in fact, no such entry fee can be required. There are obvious issues that the Americans want to address. As the Prime Minister pointed out, there are issues that we want to address. And we need to have a comprehensive conversation where we discuss all of those things together. The point that I hope the United States will come to recognize is that this is a two-way street. For 40 American states, almost 40 states, Canada is their number one customer. The Americans sell more to Canada than they sell to the UK, France, Japan, and China combined. And 70% of what we sell to the United States is inputs into their manufacturing system, to which they add value and processing and sell to the rest of the world and create a lot of jobs and make a lot of money and build communities all across the United States. So there's a powerful bit of leverage that Canada does have.
And yet that's been true throughout this process. We have not seemed to make any headway at all. In fact, what we keep hearing is that there have been concessions on things like the digital services tax. So, it's certainly conceivable that the Americans would say, you want to concede a little more if you're going to talk to us? That's how it's gone thus far, hasn't it, Mr. Goodale?
Well, part of their strategy is create chaos, create all sorts of distractions and diversions and get people running after bright, shiny objects down rabbit holes. And I think we have to resist that temptation in this process. It's a very complicated negotiation. There are lots of issues to discuss. We need to be sure we don't get distracted. We don't lose our nerve. We've got to have backbone of steel and be patient and not overly anxious and certainly not held captive.
Erin O'Toole, it does seem like Canadians learned something about one of our bargaining chips this week when Jameson Greer said, we're at the end of our rope when it comes to American alcohol on Canadian shelves. Is this a bargaining chip? Because they are provincial decisions. It's not the federal government, but this is a bargaining chip that Canada can and should play?
Well, I think he's really talking about Kentucky because there's a lot of Canadians that do like Kentucky bourbon. But I think I think this is a time where if people see people like myself and Ralph putting the country first, Pierre Poilievre, was enthusiastic about me joining this committee. We also need the premiers coordinating through the Prime Minister. We should have one quarterback, and the great premiers can be wide receivers and running backs. But we have to coordinate and make decisions. And so I think the Prime Minister was right. The bourbon can flow again if so can the aluminum from BC and from Quebec. There's a net win for both sides when we drop tariffs and when we collaborate. So I do think we're going to have to play a little hardball, a little resolve. I want to see this relationship return to as much of the normal as we can get it. But we also have to be proud as Canadians in what we can do, what new markets we can open up, and we have to be willing to show the Americans that we're willing to be resolute until we get a deal that's in the interests of our workers, our provinces, and all sectors.
And I think also, without being too flamboyant about it, we need to have a constant and increasing dialogue with ordinary Americans. The policymakers and all the people in official positions, yes, of course, but also ordinary Americans, because ultimately at the end of the day, it will be the pressure from ordinary Americans talking to other Americans that actually influences the decision-making in the White House.
Well, Erin O'Toole, Ralph Goodale's point there sort of drives at what I wanted to ask you, which is you say the Prime Minister has to be the quarterback and, premiers can all work towards Team Canada. I mean, if anyone has been flamboyant in this country about talking to Americans, it is Doug Ford. And I wonder if that is who you are speaking to there.
Listen, I'm in Toronto. Doug is my premier, and I know he's passionate about standing up for workers, but I think we should make sure that before we do any ads or anything solo, it should be coordinated through the Prime Minister, yes. So the Americans love to isolate us, Catherine, including starting with Mexico and making it look like we're behind. We can't respond to these emotional sort of negotiation tactics, and that means the provinces, some of whom are going through changes, like in Quebec, new premier, we have to make sure we're strategic and we're patient at the same time. So yeah, Premier Ford and all premiers.
Do you think that Mark Carney could convince Doug Ford to give up this booze ban?
If there's a win on the other side, as per the Prime Minister's point about steel and aluminum, there's in Sault Ste. Marie and Whitby and Hamilton, like we are a great steel fabricating province. So there's got to be a win both sides here. As I said, this all started with Mr. Trump's lifetime obsession with tariffs, not realizing that it's actually a tax and rising up the cost of living for average Americans. So as Ralph said, we have to make sure more Americans understand how critical Canada is, not just for our integrated auto industry, but energy security, on national defense cooperation, on the Arctic, in Alaska. We are an indispensable partner, and I think we have to tell that story better.
Ralph Goodale, I will ask you, we raised this question earlier, is there a slow walking going on by Canada of this whole process as a strategy, trying to get time on our side? What's your assessment?
I don't know whether that's a deliberate strategy of the day or whether it's simply a product of the circumstances that we are in. I think we need to demonstrate to the Americans that we are prepared to be patient. We're not overly anxious here. We're not going to accept just the dictated terms of something that they might want to scribble down on the back of an envelope. This is a genuine negotiation that involves serious engagement and serious discussion, and we will take the time that is necessary. Both sides have acknowledged that the July 1st deadline may come and go, and all of the work may not yet be done. We need to be diligent. And I was glad to hear our ambassador the other day say we're ready to go whenever we've got somebody to sit down and talk with. We're ready to go. But on the other hand, our chief negotiator said, and there's nothing inconsistent about these two positions, she said we need to be patient. And it's not a case here of accepting just any deal. This has to be something that works for Canada and leaves us less vulnerable and less captive than we have been.
Okay. Thank you both so much for this conversation. I'm sure it's going to be an interesting meeting on Monday. I hope we can catch up with you again over the course of this process.
Yeah, very glad to talk to you and very glad to be working with Erin.
Nice to see you, Ralph. Thank you, Catherine.
Did we check? Do we know if you're wearing matching ties today?
It's Friday. There's no tie.
Thank you both so much for this.
Thank you.
All the best.
Erin O'Toole and Ralph Goodale. Lots more coming up on the House podcast, including in about 10 minutes, Ontario's Doug Ford tells me the surprising first words Mark Carney ever said to him. I'm Catherine Cullen. You are listening to The House, making politics make sense. Make sure to give us a follow so you never miss an episode and tell us what you think of the show. You can email us at thehouse@cbc.ca. Well, a few days ago, the Prime Minister decided he wanted to be a YouTuber.
I promise you, I will never sugarcoat our challenges. Instead, I will talk with you directly and regularly about our plan, why we're doing what we're doing, what's working, what isn't. and what we're going to do next.
Mark Carney's 10-minute video has racked up over 500,000 views, and since posting it, subscriptions to Carney's personal YouTube channel have nearly doubled. But long-form YouTube chats aren't the only new effort the government is making to get its message out to Canadians. It's also removed rules around partisanship in government advertising. As of last year, publicly funded ads can now use party slogans and be, and this is a quote, self-congratulatory. So, what is the deal with Mark Carney's communications strategy? Is it all liberal hurrah with no substance, or a savvy way to get Canadians' attention? To talk about it, I'm joined by Dennis Matthews, president of Creative Currency and former advertising advisor to Prime Minister Stephen Harper, and Dave Summer, senior vice president of marketing and communications at the University Health Network Foundation. He is also a former digital strategist for Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Welcome to the House to you both.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Dave, what do you think is going on? What is the Prime Minister trying to get out of posting on YouTube specifically right now?
I think the first thing to recognize is that he's playing to his strengths, right? This is a prime minister who has commanded headlines for longer speeches, right, so far in his administration, and it's what he does best. And, I think he's understood that his battlefield is not necessarily the quick soundbite or the clip from question period. It's let me get out there, let me sit down, let me have a long conversation, or let me, do a long speech that catches a lot of attention in headlines. And so what better place to do that, than YouTube, than a place where, that long-form video, long-form explainers are rewarded.
Both of Mark Carney's predecessors have used YouTube as well. I'm going to take you down memory lane here. Stephen Harper had his 24/7 videos, which were made to look like news content.
Welcome to 24/7, a week in the life of the Prime Minister of Canada and more. This week, the Prime Minister announces the Canada First Research Excellence Fund. He celebrates Humanity First Canada's 10th anniversary, and Canadian soccer star Christine Sinclair talks sports. Plus,
little flashback there. Justin Trudeau had a little bit more of that sort of explainer vibe to his posts.
Immigration. Let's talk about it. In the last 2 years, our population has grown really fast, like baby boom fast. And increasingly, bad actors like fake colleges and big chain corporations have been exploiting our immigration system for their own interests. So we're doing.
So Dennis, how does what Mark Carney is doing here compare to what his predecessors were doing?
Well, look, I think it's important to start with why YouTube. We're talking about the medium here. When Stephen Harper was doing this, when Justin Trudeau was doing it, more and more emerging. Today YouTube has cemented itself. I mean, it's the second most visited website on earth. It's the second largest search engine in the world when people are going to find out information or look for things. Second, by the way, to Google. And it's reaching 80% of the population. And so when you think about the why do you go on to a platform like YouTube, it's because that's where regular people across the country are at. And I think there's been a bit of a misconception with online videos and other things that they always need to be short and they need to be pithy and these little clips. But there is an appetite for the type of content historically we might have been more used to listening to on the radio or seeing on TV. People are finding it on YouTube. It's why Mr. Beast with his 15 to 20 minute videos is amongst the biggest media stars in the world today.
I do love the comparison between Prime Minister Mark Carney and Mr. Beast.
That's the first, a one and only.
We locked 300 MPs in the House of Commons, and who's left?
Who's going to get out first?
I just trapped 50 of the biggest streamers in this queue, and whoever leaves last was that $1 million.
So we're going to go from Mr. Beast to sort of into the time machine, Dave, because Carney's video has been compared to FDR's fireside chats of the 1930s, the 40s. But Depression-era Prime Minister R.B. Bennett also gave long, uninterrupted radio addresses to Canadians.
I returned home with the conviction that the economic position of Canada today is better than that of almost any other country in the world.
I mean, it is at once exactly the vibes of the Carney video and kind of the antithesis, given the trouble ahead that he is pointing to. But what is it, do you think, about a crisis that pushes leaders to do these longer, direct addresses, Dave?
I think the question almost answers itself in that the leaders see this as an opportunity to, go directly to the people to say, I don't need to go to traditional media channels right now. There is so much that I want to say, that I want to reassure the people that I'm on top of things, that it's more of a benefit for me to do this on my own channel. And look at the way it's presented as well, right? Like if you watch that video, there is no music, which is interesting in a video of that length. There's no score, no soundtrack, no nothing, no intro, no extra. The background is very sparse, just a bunch of books. I actually don't recognize that room where he's in.
I wondered that too, yeah.
Yeah, and the desk, just one little gimmick on that desk, but really nothing else. It's a very stark kind of place, but I think that fits the message as well.
The gimmick is the Sir Isaac Brock figurine that he holds up to talk about the comparisons to the War of 1812.
That's right, exactly that. And I think, you know, if you think about TV shows or podcasts or radio shows where, you know, gradually they add more things to the background and it's wacky and zany, I don't think they're going there, but I think, you know, he might want to be a little careful, you know, adding stuff like that every single time. But it caught my attention. I thought it was clever, and, you know, time will tell if he does it again.
Dennis, Dave mentioned the traditional media. Toronto Star's Althea Raj said earlier this week that Canadians can't see Canadian news on outlets like Instagram and Facebook. That is because of the tech giants' backlash to Liberal government policy. But they can, she pointed out, watch Mark Carney's video. To what extent is Carney taking advantage of a hamstrung news media environment?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely some irony in that for sure. I think what he's doing is not a ton different than what a lot of other corporations or causes are doing. You know, they're trying to get their message out in an unfiltered way, and the advantage to doing so on social media, and YouTube is the example we're talking about here, is they can build up their following. And so when we talk here about how this video, you know, basically doubled the size of Mark Carney's YouTube page overnight, the benefit of that is not just that people watched his speech here and maybe learned something from it and learned something about him and what his government is up to, but now they're trapped in that ecosystem a little bit. Next time they're on YouTube or they're on their For You channel or they're scrolling on their phone, they're going to be more likely to see future Mark Carney content. And so really by putting out something that's interesting, compelling for his brand that he has built up, you know, he's doing something that's laying a foundation for future communications.
Oh, that's
also, if I could add, that's also what YouTube wants politicians and creators to do as much as possible, right? YouTube really wants people to lean in from being a librarian where, you know, in the past politically, perhaps politicians would stash all their videos on YouTube and not really have a content strategy, which is kind of where YouTube started in the realm of politics, to being a content creator. So they want Mark Carney, in a way, to act like Mr. Beast, to quote Dennis, right? In a way. And I think that he's caught on to that now.
In the way, in the sense of drawing people in, you mean, as opposed to like game show style stunts.
Yeah. You never know. Not rule anything out.
Dave, a minute ago, you mentioned this idea of the gimmick, the Sir Isaac Brock figurine. That caught Pierre Poilievre's attention, too. He had some criticism for the video.
The only talks that Mark Carney is doing are YouTube videos, where he's comparing himself to Sir Isaac Brock and holding up little figurines in his office. So he told all of you the other day that with his new majority, he was going to stop showboating. And then a few days later, he put out a showboating YouTube video, right?
The talks he's referring to there are CUSMA negotiations with the U.S., but I wonder, does he have a point that there is some showboating rather than action? Dave?
Well, I'd say that Pierre Poilievre, you know, someone who really understood how to use YouTube, you know, in the lead up to the last election, who knows a thing or two about how to put together a compelling video, might not have a leg to stand on when he accuses the Prime Minister of showboating, per se. I mean, you know, obviously when you do a video and you hold up a little figurine and compare yourself to a war hero, you're going to raise eyebrows, but that was the point of the video, right? And so the proof is in the pudding. You know, Mark Carney is or is not negotiating with the United States government and is not making the results of those negotiations public, but he gets to do it from the bully pulpit, whereas Pierre Poilievre has to do it from the hallway, you know, in West Block.
Did you cringe a little, Dave, when he held up the figurine? You thought it went too far?
I don't think I cringed a little because I was watching it. It was on the desk. And Dennis, I don't know if you thought it was effective or not. I was like, what's that? Because it was out of focus, right? A little bit at the beginning. And then he held it up and I was like, oh, that's an interesting kind of little device in an otherwise very sparse video.
Yeah, I mean, like the fact that we're talking about it, it made it memorable. And, you know, is there an element of it, you know, could it go into cringe? I think it got close for sure, but it makes it memorable. And these videos where, you know, it's somebody just talking direct to camera without a lot going on, you know, you need to have some devices that, you know, give people some recall and give them something to think about and give them something to criticize. That's what gets people talking about this kind of content.
Okay, I want to take a moment here to turn to government advertising. Last year, the Carney government repealed some of the Trudeau-era advertising rules meant to keep government ads from being partisan. Ryan Tumulty of the Toronto Star wrote that the government can now toot its own horn. Let's listen to what that sounds like.
The world is changing, but with every challenge comes a chance to build better, stronger. We're investing in ourselves, buying Canadian, prospering from our resources and critical minerals. Our plan is to...
Dennis, you worked as an advertising advisor to the Harper government. Folks will remember those Economic Action Plan ads. What do you think about the fact that Mark Carney is leaning into this when, you know, a big portion of the public doesn't necessarily like seeing their tax dollars spent this way?
Yeah, this is the reality of how you communicate today. And the Harper government in the 2007-8 period revolutionized how the federal government and then subsequently the provinces communicated their message. And it started with this reality that if you're not paying to get your message out, the public isn't going to hear it, and they're not going to know what's going on. And this is just the shift in the size and scope and ability of media to cover governments, how people are getting their information in a fractured media environment, social and digital and TV, radio, and all of that. And so it's not a lot different than a consumer brand does. Like, there's only so many press releases you can issue. There's only so many posts you can make on social. If you're not paying to get your message in front of people, they're not going to know. What's become, I think, more into focus the last number of years is the size and scale of these budgets have gone up and up and up to the point where some of the provinces, Ontario in particular, but also the federal government, they're now as big advertisers as the Coca-Colas or the Procter & Gamble's of the world. And I think it's been a little jarring for people to watch that. But if the government isn't advertising, they're not getting their message out.
Dave, you were part of the Trudeau government, which got rid of this practice. What do you think about using public dollars to toot your own horn, as Ryan said?
I remember when it was a fight just to hire a videographer because we thought it might be a little too showy after the 24/7 era. But now, those Harper 24/7 videos, or even those Harper Economic Action Plan billboards, the furor over that seems almost a little quaint now. I agree with Dennis totally. This is a necessity. This is something that governments have to do to communicate properly with the people. I think that's what Carney's doing quite well. But if you think about, what we've come through just in the past 10, 15 years, what used to get people riled up and what now people kind of understand needs to happen, I think the progress that we've made certainly makes people raise little eyebrows about taxpayer money, but it's necessary.
Okay. I'm sure some members of the audience will have some strong feelings about that. But before I let you guys go, just quickly, I wonder if I could ask you both what your top piece of advice would be for political communicators right now, be it medium or message. Dennis, I'll start with you.
I think it's doing more of what Mark Carney did with this video. And if we look at his primary opponent, Pierre Poilievre, it's more what Pierre Poilievre has been doing for the last 3 or 4 years. It's hard work to build up your social media following and build those connections with voters and Canadians across the country. But if you're consistent with your content, if you're entertaining from time to time, you're going to break through. And if you can break through and build that audience, I think you're going to have a lot more success getting your message out and persuading people than if you rely on a really fractured media environment that's out there to get your message out.
Dave?
For Mark Carney, my advice would be to maintain this idea that he's being real with Canadians. That channel can very quickly become just another, politician-ease kind of jargony channel where they, recite their talking points and put their press releases on video and dump them there. So consistency, like Dennis says, is the most important thing, but also maintaining this idea of realness and authenticity as much as you can as the Prime Minister, but maintaining this idea that I'm giving it to you straight and not any other way. Otherwise, people will turn off real fast and they'll roll their eyes at these kinds of things.
No rolling our eyes here at either of you. Thank you both so much for this conversation. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Dennis Matthews is a former advertising advisor to Prime Minister Stephen Harper. Dave Summer is a former digital strategist for Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. That YouTube video by the Prime Minister with the reference to our U.S. ties creating weaknesses that need to be fixed, it was very much on the front burner when, on Monday, I sat down with 4 Canadian premiers for a panel discussion about what we can all agree on in this country. A big part of that discussion was about trade, both within Canada and beyond. It was part of a summit organized by the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. I was joined on stage by Ontario's Doug Ford, New Brunswick's Susan Holt, the Northwest Territories' R.J. Simpson, and Prince Edward Island's Robert Lance, who is currently the chair of the Council of the Federation, which brings all 13 premiers together. Here are some of the highlights of our conversation. The Prime Minister put out a video over the weekend in which he says many of our former strengths, based on our close ties to America, have become weaknesses that we must correct. that idea that our closeness with the United States is a weakness that we have to fix. I wonder if you agree with that.
Well, I agree, and what I think the Prime Minister is saying, we have to diversify our trade, not be so reliant on the U.S. We have to be more self-reliant. And I've always said, I'll just speak for Ontario, we don't need Donald Trump to speed up permits for our nuclear expansion. We're leading the world with the SMRs, small modular reactors. We're building the largest nuclear large-scale plant in the world. We don't need Donald Trump for that. We don't need Donald Trump to expedite permits to get our critical minerals out of the ground in Ontario and refined. We have more critical minerals than anywhere in the world, and I know my colleagues do as well. Where there's so many things we don't need President Trump to do, we need to diversify our trade. And make no mistake about it, folks. Yes, we're the U.S.'s #1 customer. They're our #1 customer as well. And I always differentiate between the great American people that love Canadians versus President Trump. I tell our American friends, we don't see eye to eye with President Trump. Protectionism doesn't work anywhere in the world.
But Premier Ford is saying the Americans are great friends of ours, and I'm sure that's very true for many people here, that you have individual relationships. But the idea that it has become a weakness for Canada, how reliant we are, and one we need to fix, do you accept that premise?
Certainly, because as Premier Ford said, and I think as any business in this room would know, when you have one customer that's responsible for the vast majority of your business, and in New Brunswick's case, it's 92% of our exports that go to the U.S. That's a vulnerability. And it makes you vulnerable not only to the conditions we're in today, but it makes you more of a price taker than a price setter. And that's why businesses look to diversify their customers, diversify the sectors that they're in, and that's why New Brunswick is doing the same thing. And luckily, we have what the world wants. We have the critical minerals that they want. We have the port infrastructure like Port of St. John that's doing more and more business with Ontario, that is reaching destinations around the world where they're finding countries and companies that would rather do business with Canada than with the US. Because they're in the same boat. They're looking at this vulnerability and thinking, you know what, we need a better network, a better web of allies.
Premier Lance, I wonder, I think part of the debate is this question of whether this is truly a weakness that we have to rectify versus a rough patch, let's say. How do you view it?
I guess I'd take a bit of a different view on this. There's many things with the Prime Minister's approach that I agree with and I'm very happy about, but I didn't like that choice of word. Weakness is not the way I would put it. Susan just said vulnerability might be a better word. I'm not sure how I'd describe it, but...
What's the difference to your mind?
Well, look, it's true that the U.S. is a very, very important trading partner for us, always has been, and we're maybe a little too reliant on easy access to that market. In Atlantic Canada, we have got very long-standing social, cultural, familial ties with the New England states in particular, which is where the vast majority of our exports go to. And Prince Edward Island has built a very, very strong export economy over the last several decades that we traditionally didn't have. It's much more diversified and than it used to be. So when I travel to New England, I see that we have many allies there. I meet with governors, we all meet with governors. We do have many allies, and the Trump era will end. I think that what we are seeing is an opportunity to build new trade relationships around the world, and we're doing that. So there's a big opportunity to expand, but I still see that relationship with the United States being just as important going forward.
Premier Simpson, weakness, thumbs up, thumbs down.
I would say it is a weakness. I mean, just look at the position that we're in right now. We are really under the gun with CUSMA, but I think that Canada has what it needs to become more self-sufficient. We're always going to have a strong relationship with the United States. Geography and relationships dictate that, but we don't need a dependent relationship where this threat of upending CUSMA, would throw our economy into a tailspin. We don't need that. We need to be more self-sufficient. We have the ability, and we should be doing it.
Okay, I want to talk a bit about our relationships within this country. And Premier Holt, I'm going to start with you because you were just hanging out with Mark Carney this morning. Folks in this town, I think, have heard he's somebody who has quite a high bar, bit of a tough customer. What do you do in those meetings to ensure that things are moving as quickly as possible for your province?
Well, we come with a focused agenda. All of us have precious time, and we come knowing that the Prime Minister is well briefed, so we can get right down to it and get to the specifics of what we're trying to accomplish, what we're trying to accelerate, what isn't going right, what needs to be brought back on the rails, and we talk about where we need to be tomorrow and where we need to be next year.
Premier Ford, you had various premiers, the Prime Minister to your cottage, and I wonder what you think you have learned as your relationship with this Prime Minister has grown about getting things done with him specifically.
Well, first of all, I personally have an incredible relationship with Prime Minister Carney, but I have an incredible relationship with all the premiers. I've said over and over again, I just don't care about political stripes. I don't care if you're from the green, orange, red, blue party.
Is it true that the first thing Mark Carney said to you is, "I'm more conservative than you are"?
He did. That's the only thing I'm going to divulge. We sat down at the restaurant because I don't share our conversation, but I thought it was funny. The first thing he said, Premier, I'm more conservative than you. And I said, well, that's ironic, Prime Minister, because everyone accuses me of being a liberal. So what, I'm a prudent fiscal manager, like we all are. It doesn't matter what political stripe.
Okay, I want to talk interprovincial trade. It was a friend of yours, Chrystia Freeland, I believe, Premier Ford, who said, interprovincial trade has become sexy last year. I wonder, Premier Lance, when there is so much enthusiasm over tearing down these interprovincial trade barriers, like I've been in Ottawa for 10 years plus, this was a real snoozer of a topic 12 years ago, and I remember being on at the Canada Day celebrations on Parliament Hill, and that was the line that got the most applause. Ryan Reynolds was there. People were still losing their mind over interprovincial trade. So when there is this level of enthusiasm, why is it still so hard to get some of these barriers taken down? Yes, we've seen progress, but there are still plenty of barriers in place.
Well, I guess the short answer is, if it was easy, it would have been done a long time ago, when it was just the, private conversations between policy wonks here in the capital. But, when this trade war, our difficulties with the U.S. arose, interprovincial trade sort of rose to the top, and I think it became prominent because a lot of Canadians just didn't know that these barriers existed. And I think there was an expectation that we should deal with it. But there is a lot of work left to do. It's a very tangled web. It's going to require a lot of collaboration, and it's across multiple sectors. It's across regulatory streams, labor streams, goods and services. There's a lot of work to do. As long as we continue and keep chipping away at it, we'll make improvements, but it's just tough work.
It can seem abstract, and so I'd like to get you all to weigh in on this. What is the interprovincial trade barrier that really grinds your gears? Which one drives you absolutely crazy? Premier Holt, you're nodding, perhaps laughing at me. I'll let you go first. Is there one that you're just like, man, if I could get rid of this thing?
I mean, there's certainly a few, but the one that I would flag that I think has the most broad impact is the barriers on trucking and transportation, because that affects so many other sectors who are trying to move their goods but find that they have to switch drivers at this border and then switch first aid kits at this border and then change trucks altogether at the next one, and it adds time and it adds cost both to the customer and to the client of that transportation one. So trucking to me is the highest impact that we still haven't been able to get completely over the line, but good progress has been made on that front.
Premier Simpson, there's one that's just drives you nuts, interprovincial trade barriers.
Well, I'd have to agree with Susan when it comes to trade, but I think labor mobility is the other one that is huge, especially for us in the territory where we rely so much on southern workers. And so in terms of healthcare and any type of skilled labor, that's an area where it really slows everything down when you're waiting weeks or months to get authorization to bring someone in to do work that needs to be done today.
Premier Ford.
Well, first of all, I agree with both your comments about labor mobility and transportation, but all the barriers drive me crazy. This is, I always call, a kitchen table issue. We can talk labor mobility, we can talk transportation. Yes, people understand that. But do you know what people understand? is when we can't ship a case of BC wine over to Ontario or Ontario wine over to New Brunswick. They just can't comprehend that we can't do it.
Premier Lance, do you have a sense when that direct-to-consumer alcohol sales might actually be? Because we've been talking about it for quite a while now, and I think people are excited.
I think we're almost there, but I want to just go back to the previous question about interprovincial trade barriers, and the trucking really is a big thing. In the case of Prince Edward Island, farmers had a really rough year. We had a drought in Prince Edward Island. It was a tough year. Now we've got fuel costs that are escalating very quickly. Getting product to market when you've got one province whose standards are higher or lower, however you want to describe them, it's hard to get product through Quebec. So that's hurting producers, getting products to market. We're in an environment where everyone wants to make Canada more competitive, not just with interprovincial trade, but so that we can scale globally. These are the things we're trying to do.
That's a very nice transition that you've provided me to for talking a bit about selling more of Canada to the world. And Premier Ford, one of the big markets Canada has been talking about is China. We know you have concerns about Chinese EVs. Writ large, though, do you think the extent to which Canada is leaning in with China is a problem or a good move?
Well, I think, first of all, we have 51 free trade agreements, and we have to target those countries in a big way. And really focus on that. And as going back to the interprovincial trade, I'm really pushing, our staff and our officials to get something done by the end of this May. Like, we all have MOUs. We've signed MOUs, right? But that's just a piece of paper. Let's get a binding agreement to start moving. Either, you're in or you're out. Well, let's start moving.
How broad? Like, what kind of an agreement are you talking about?
Just a binding agreement rather than just an MOU. These are official. We put everything to the side and opened up Ontario for everyone. There's still a little bit of protectionism within provinces. We'll sign it, but you aren't touching this or you aren't touching that. Well, it's either a free trade agreement or it's not a free trade agreement. We're opening up to the largest market in the country, doing about $350 billion. For the China question, we do have to be cautious. There's no doubt we have to be cautious. We have to be respectful. If there's areas of free and fair trade, I'd be all in favor of it. It's very sensitive for us in the auto sector to bring subsidized vehicles in from China that our auto manufacturers, our uniform workers, can't compete against someone's being subsidized making $6 an hour in China. I always say, when it comes to the Chinese, do what Honda and Toyota did. Hire Ontario employees, and we're good. I'll be their biggest promoter. But don't try to undercut our market.
Writ large, zooming out beyond China, I'll just ask you in closing on this topic. What is one thing you'd like to see us agree on a little bit more, move a little bit more on our agreement?
I guess what it is we all agree on is that Canada has so much more potential. It does feel like recent years, decades, we haven't been aspirational enough. We haven't been reaching far enough, and it took an incident like Donald Trump's war on Canada to prompt us into action. And I think
war on Canada.
Yeah, war on trade with Canada, I guess. Well, at times it felt like it was almost a war on Canada. But this we all agree on, and we all agree. I have found in my interactions with the other premiers that, personally I agree that what's good for Alberta is good for Prince Edward Island, and what's good for New Brunswick is good for Prince Edward Island, and that we need to build this country together. There's often been times where everyone has looked out for their own interests, where it felt like a zero-sum game. It doesn't feel like that now. I think we all agree on that if we work together, this country has got so much more potential, and that we're well on our way to realizing that.
Premier Simpson.
In the Northwest Territories, the territorial government, we don't have political parties. We're a consensus government system, and so we are forced to work together. And when I'm at the table with the other premiers, I get the same sense there that I do in the Northwest Territories in that consensus system, because there's so much that we agree on. We all want to see Canada succeed, that at the table, we have 13 passionate individuals across the political spectrum. There might be some disagreements, but everyone is on the same page when it comes to knowing that we need a strong, united Canada. And so sometimes after we meet, I'll see a headline saying that there's cracks in the Federation, and I'm sitting in those meetings. I've never seen a crack in the Federation coming out of those meetings.
Some of the highlights of my conversation this week with the Northwest Territories Premier R.J. Simpson. You also heard PEI's Robert Lance, New Brunswick's Susan Holt, and Ontario's Doug Ford. Okay, that is it for us this week. Our crew on the House is Kristen Everson, Benjamin Lopez-Stephen, Theo Van Bussicum, and our senior producer is Jennifer Chevalier. Technical production by Miguel Plant. I am Catherine Cullen. Thank you so much for listening.